So, good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? So far, so good. All three of you, right? Well, thanks for being here. I think it's going to be a fun presentation. We'll figure it out. So, since it's a small crowd, what I want to do is I want to invite you. Anytime you have a question about something, just ask a question. That way, we get the questions answered you might have, and as they arise right away. Does it make sense? Sounds good. So today, I'm Dr. Werner Absenger. I'm the program director for the Zotero Institute for Culinary Education. And today I'm talking a little bit about showcasing your expertise through writing. And in order for me to illustrate how I can do that, I think it's important for me to give you a little bit of a background where I'm coming from to put the presentation into context. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense, because many of you think that I'm a chef, right? But I'm going to talk about quite a few unchefy things, so to speak. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce myself. And so what we're talking about is I have a PhD from Saybrook University in Oakland, California. My research was with breast cancer survivors, and I was investigating the immune system. Interleukin-1 beta is a cytokine. I also have a master's in human nutrition. And so I did extensive training at the University of MD Anderson in their integrative medicine department, research internship. Then I also did some training at the University of San Diego, California, in mindfulness training, and quite extensive clinical training at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine in Washington, DC. So you see, even though I'm a chef, I took it upon myself to educate myself during my chefing career to change my career. And writing has helped me a great deal accomplish to where I'm at now. In other words, if I didn't write things, if I didn't get my education, I would not be standing in front of you talking to you today. Does that make sense so far? Very good. So fan mail, send it to this email. Hate mail, send it to this email as well. Spam, please don't send me any spam. I hate spam. Hate mail is good, spam, bad. So what we're gonna do today is what I want to do is I want to illustrate how you can use writing and different mediums. You can use your own blog to write. You can use professional organizations to showcase your expertise. You can use peer-reviewed journals. Everybody know what a peer-reviewed journal is? So that's where you publish research. And then, again, with that comes presentation at professional conferences, right? And then what I'm going to give you, hopefully, some tools that I use essentially every day to be a better writer and to communicate better with people. So far, so good? Any questions so far? Very good. So let's start with your own blog, right? So how many of you are familiar with blogs? Everybody knows what a blog is, right? How many of you own a blog? Why not? Right? That would be my first question. Like, it's really inexpensive. And let me ask another question. All of you are students here at GRCC or some other. So what are you going to school for? Anyone? I'm sorry? Nursing? Same? English department? Automotive. Right, so there we go. When we think about nursing and automotive, right? When you think about automotive, I heard you two guys talk about engines and trucks and stuff like that. So you can actually use a blog to use that to convey your expertise to your audience. So I have my own blog. It's a cancer education foundation, and so I did write a bit over the years. And so just to illustrate, some of those things I did write about are mainly geared towards cancer survivorship. But I also wrote about some articles. I was part of the Revive and Thrive project, which we started 2 years ago, where we actually cooked meals for breast cancer survivors and then delivered those meals to breast cancer survivors. So again, I think it's a worthwhile experience to not only do that, but also to let people know that you're doing that. Not only that, by that, I also let my audience know that I'm developing expertise in something, and I'm sharing that expertise. Does that make sense? Then I did presentations at GBSU for the stress management and hospitality. I did write quite a bit. So in the breast cancer or in the cancer survivorship realm, people always ask about acupuncture. And they always ask about, does this help, does this help, does this help? So rather than always saying, oh, do this, do this, do this, I actually wrote a series of 3 blog posts about, so what does acupuncture look like for breast cancer survivors? And then I can, when people ask me, I can say, oh, I wrote a little bit about that. And what I did was, again, by writing those articles, I kind of worked on my own knowledge, getting my own knowledge, but also developing some sort of expertise in that field. And then, obviously, I'm a chef, and I have a master's in nutrition, so it only makes sense to write quite a bit about eating. And it's the same thing. People always ask me, well, what do you do that? And why should I eat that and not that, and things like that. So what I do is I try to sit down every once in a while and write all those things out. So the next time somebody asks me, I can point them to, oh, by the way, I did write about that. Am I still making sense? Very good.
Is all this on your blog?
Yeah, that's all on my blog. And so the last article I'm going to highlight was I'm the proudest of, because when you look at the Facebook share, right, almost 3,000 shares, and that's not bad for me, it's not bad. Like other people, right, 18, 20, 30, 40,000 shares. But for a small blog like myself, writing about the topic I'm writing about, 3,000 shares is not too bad. But again, what I did was I sat down, wrote about stuff that interested me and that people were asking about quite frequently, and then that became about. So, in other words, you can use your own blog to establish expertise and showcase your expertise through writing. Any questions thus far? So far, so good, right? So the next thing you can do is showcase your expertise through writing through professional organizations. And what does that look like? So when I was chef still, I worked for the Emery Grand Plaza Hotel downtown here. And so I was already working on my PhD, so I developed expertise in stress management. And so I knew that chefs are always stressed for most part, so hospitality workers, period, are stressed. So what I did was, so what can we do for hospitality workers to actually help them deal with the stress, right? And so I did stress management groups at the Emery Grand and things like that. But also what I did was I thought, wouldn't it be cool to let more people know about that? So what we did was we contacted the hotelexecutive.com, which is a platform or a professional organization, and the website is read by about 18 to 20,000 people a month, so which is not bad. And so what we did was I wrote 4 articles, and that's essentially what it looks like. So again, you can see I addressed stress management 101 for employees. I talked about avoiding burnout for our chefs. I talked about effective communication and how that reduces stress, because when people really know what you're talking about, right, then they, oh, what is he saying, and whatever, right? And then we talked about how to increase employee stress resilience. So again, what I used was, as I went to school and as I started gaining expertise in those fields, I just started writing about that. And by writing about that, those opportunities arose. Make sense so far? Okay. So can you see how that ties in with writing for real people, right? And who cares? Well, first and foremost, I cared to share the information. And then the really cool thing is, because I cared to put it out there, some people cared to read it. How cool is that, right? So the third topic I want to talk about is peer-reviewed journals. So again, as part of my PhD studies, I had to do original research. And so through that research, I made connections in all kinds of different fields with all kinds of different people. And so some of those people invited me to help with their research. So again, what we do is we do research, we investigate phenomena, and then we write about that phenomena, right? And so hopefully, we don't do that research, well, we do it a little bit for us as to satisfy our own ego, right? But what's the point in doing the research if we don't share it with other people what we found, right? So for peer-reviewed journals, I wrote an article with a colleague of mine who is a sex coach, a very well-respected sex coach, and we looked really in how stress affects couples who want to conceive. In other words, people who want children but can't get any children, and how stress actually affects the hormone system of both, not just the female, but also the male. And so we wrote a little bit about that, and we talked about how stress management could actually balance the hormones out a little bit. So that was a pretty interesting article. Then again, through my studies and research with cancer in the cancer environment and how to help alleviate pain in cancer, I learned quite a bit about hypnosis. And so there's a couple of researchers in Canada who do a phenomenal job with hypnosis and cancer survivors. And they came out with an ebook which has essentially step-by-step instructions and clinical cases of cancer survivors on how to use medical hypnosis, helping people deal with the situation better. And so what I did was, it's like an 800-page book. So what I did is I read it, I dug into it, and then that journal asked me to do a book review for them. And so again, that was published. And the last research I want to highlight was, again, through the activities I did through my own activities, I made connections with other researchers, one of them a psychiatrist in Colorado, and another one actually a psychologist in Brisbane, Australia. So the three of us got together and said, wouldn't it be cool to investigate a mind-body modality, but instead of bringing people to us in the room, we're going to actually bring people into a mental health facility or a mental health clinic. We sit them in front of a TV, and we pipe the psychiatrist in via television, right? And so we did a research study, which was pretty fascinating. So we used an underserved population in Colorado, mostly Hispanic, not a lot of income. And so what we did was, we did just that. We investigated a 6-week mind-body skill training. So we show people how to relax through meditation, how to use yoga and things like that. And we looked whether it had an effect on mental health outcomes. And then we asked a little bit about cell phone usage and things like that. So again, we did the research, we wrote it up, and we published it. So again, what I'm hoping to illustrate here is, through my own experience, because my own experience I know best and I can talk best about it, but show you that you can move from a blog, right, which is an audience of whoever wants to read it, right? Then you establish expertise through that. Then you can move through professional organizations, you further establish expertise through that, but you target it to a specific group, right? And then you can use those two to actually help you get published in peer-reviewed journals. And the really cool thing about peer-reviewed publishing is that as a researcher or as a person with a PhD, it essentially is viewed as you establishing street credit, so to speak. Without publications, you are not very credible. Am I still making sense? So as I went through the process, go ahead, did you have a question? No, okay. So as I went through the process, what we did was, in order to find journals interested in our research, we actually wrote to the editors, right? So we wrote the editors, say, hey, we did this research, and we think your journal, based on what we read about it, might be interested in publishing that. And part of their questions back to us was, well, what's your expertise, right? how do we know that you know what you're talking about, right? And again, through establishing, obviously higher education, but through establishing a track record of writing for different outlets, we could show those editors that we actually hopefully know a little bit what we are talking about. Am I still making sense? Any questions thus far? Very good. So, and then here's what that looked like. So this is and most of it is published online. You can download it in PDF form, but this is the article in Sexual Relationship Therapy. This is the article in the American Journal for Clinical Hypnosis. And this is the article in Technology and Behavior. So now we talked about using a blog, using a professional organization, and using peer-reviewed journals to really highlight your expertise, right? So if I'd ask you obviously you write about what you're passionate about, right? But what's the difference between writing for a blog and writing for a peer-reviewed journal, you think? Exactly, right? So when you write for a blog, you have to keep it mellow, you keep it understandable, right? Otherwise, people will, click, right? They won't read it. But for the peer-reviewed journal, you have to use totally different language because you have a totally different audience where you have professionals and you have to really choose your words wisely. And so that's good training. So writing the blog helps you understand the topic. And when you write for your peer-reviewed journal, then you understand the topic. You can explain it, but you also can use big words to explain it. Am I making sense? And the other way, it's the exact opposite applies. So if you read a lot of peer-reviewed journals, and I'll get to that in a little bit, you have to actually know how to take this information and make it accessible to your blog readers, right? Because they wouldn't, most of this audience would, or most of my blog audience would not understand this audience, the way this is written. And so then, again, you want to connect with people, right? You're really passionate about what you're doing, right? Like I heard you talk, my truck only gets 10 miles a gallon and this sucks and things like that, right? You're passionate about what should I do. And so we do the same thing. We do original research and then we want to share it, right? We don't do it for ourselves, then we sit on a couch and sip coffee and watch TV reruns, right? We don't do that. So we go out and try to tell people about our research. And I want to just highlight a couple of things from that. And so again, I want you to think about when you think in terms of a blog audience, a professional audience, perhaps a medical audience and highly professional people, to a audience at a professional conference. And so the medium at a professional conference is either PowerPoint for most parts or poster presentations, right? So what's the difference between a blog post, a peer-reviewed journal article post, a post or something you write for a professional audience, and a poster presentation?
Right, different length.
Right?
The poster doesn't have that much
Right,
text.
yeah. So the general guidelines are for my blog, I can write however short, however long I want to write, right? Nobody tells me how long or how short my post should be. For the professional audience, like for the hotelexecutive.com, we got strict guidelines. You need to write articles that are between 2,500 and 2,750 words, no longer, no shorter. So again, you have to kind of think about the material and you need to kind of meet those guidelines without writing too much again over and over or not enough. Does that make sense? Same for the peer-reviewed journal articles, very, very limited amount to write about. And for the poster, I'm going to show you a couple in a little bit. So again, I did presentations at Annual Pain and Palliative Care Conference right here in Grand Rapids, in Lansing. And so the really cool thing is, again, you establish expertise by doing that because they always print those really cool programs, right, with what it is, and then with the speakers. So again, really cool thing. But professional conferences, again, you have to present information not only in writing, but like we're doing here. You have to interact one-on-one with people, and that's part of communication too. It's not necessarily writing, but again, through speaking with people, you hone your communication skills verbally and non-verbally. So, and then I was in Tucson, Arizona at the Science of Consciousness conference, which is one of the biggest conferences that deals with human consciousness. And I did submit an abstract, and it was submitted for a poster, which is called Spukhafte Fernwirkung, which deals with distant healing intentionality, which is really fascinating when you really think about that. What I'm thinking, or if I send healing thoughts to you, that actually might affect you in one way, shape, or form. And so what I did was I plowed through the research, and I really looked at it. And then I looked at biophoton emissions and things like that, and quantum entanglement, and presented a poster on that. So again, you can imagine it's a very complex topic, right? But you only have so much space on a poster. And Spukhafte Fernwirkung is Einstein's quote about it's spooky action at a distance. And then I did another presentation at a scientific presentation about hypnosis and cytokines or the immune system. And that's the abstract, or the book of abstracts, right? And that's essentially the poster. So a very complex topic in like 500 words or less. So you really have to think about the words you're using, how many of them you're using, because a person will stand literally 5 seconds in front of it before they either decide to move on or read the thing. And if it's too long, people don't read the thing. But if it doesn't make any sense, then you have not conveyed anything, right? So again, when I talk about writing for real people, right, and who cares, again, you care because you're passionate about what you do. And you would like, at least I would hope so, I would hope that you let other people know about all the cool stuff you're doing, right? And you do that via writing, and there's all those different mediums, and all of those different mediums have different requirements. And so as you practice all of that, you become really versatile, because then you can borrow the skills you learn from a poster presentation in an article, right? Because all of a sudden you can say, how can I make this shorter? How can I make that more accessible, right? And that's really what's about. It's always thinking about what you're writing about and how to make it as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. Am I still making sense? Okay. And then that's the other poster I presented. And again, a very complex topic when we talk about cancer, and cancer is thought to be spread via angiogenesis, which is the growth of new blood vessels, and somehow a mind-body therapy, in this case hypnosis, affecting the expression of VEGF, which is vasoendothelial growth factor. And so again, how do you present a really, really complex topic in 500 words or less?
Did it work?
Did hypnosis. So there is some pretty good research indicating that when people so either use hypnosis or other relaxation therapies, that it actually slows new blood vessel growth for new cancers, which is pretty fascinating, really.
Wow.
Good question. Any other questions? So again, I'm using examples from my career and how my career evolved and how I used writing to get the attention of more people around me, right? But yes, is it stroking my ego a little bit? Yes, absolutely, right? But the main theme is I didn't invest all that money, time, and energy to do research, to sit on it and put it under my bed at home, right? It's about sharing all of that information. And we use writing to do that. Any questions thus far? So now I want to highlight some tools of the trade. So the next 4 or 5, whatever I'm going to show you, 5 tools I use every single day. Well, the last one I don't perhaps use every single day, but at least once a week. So I use Grammarly.com. So you might have noticed I talk a little funny, so I'm not a native speaker, right? And so I can use all the help I can get with writing Grammarly and writing correct, right? And so I use this tool, which is very handy. I use, on a daily basis, I use the APA style, the publication manual, because I really want to make sure that I adhere to the guidelines of good writing, and also to let people know that what I write about is based in the evidence. So I make sure I let people know whatever I write about, I did my homework, and I showcase the homework via citations. I use readable.io quite a bit, and I'm going to show you in a little bit what that is. I use Zotero quite a bit, and I use databases for my research quite a bit. So the databases I probably use, I use at least once a week quite extensively, but all the other tools I use at least once a day. And so here's what Grammarly looks. Anyone familiar with those tools? A couple, very good. What tool are you familiar with? Which one? Grammarly? Yeah. Yeah, right? It's really easy to use, and I use it always as a double check, second check, right? Very good. And then there's the APA manual, and they have a fabulous website. And so I use that to clarify my writing. Sometimes you have grammar problems, should I write this or this? Or sometimes you have citation problems. And so they really highlight, it's a really good website and a really good manual to keep you on track so your communications is crisp and clear and understandable.
Werner, I think it's so interesting that you say that you use APA every day, because I think as a professor, students just assume that we know our style manuals by heart.
Yeah.
And I find in my classroom, I do often say, like, even I have to look
Yeah.
this up, or they ask me a question, and I say, let's look it up.
Yeah.
Because we don't know. We need the manual. It's too much.
Exactly, and you bring up a very good point. Like, so when I teach my classes, right, and students cite, for example, so it's when we talk about regular citations like journal articles or books, I know pretty much this is what it should look like, right? But when we talk about YouTube videos or things like that, or things that are not cited that often, I very often find myself going back to the manual and look at, oh, is this how you cite that? Right? Excellent point, thank you. And so yes, I use it on a daily basis, because all those tools help me not to look like a fool to my readers for most parts. Does that make sense? And then Readable.io, how many of you are familiar with that? So it's a fascinating tool, and again, I use it every day. What this tool does for me is you pop in text, and then you run the Analyze Text button, and then it tells you at what level, at what grade level the text is written. Not only that, it gives you examples. Does it tend to be more from a male voice or from a female voice? Or is it more neutral? Is it more positive? Is it more negative? It gives you keywords. It gives you all kinds of cool stuff. But the most important thing I use it almost every day for is because, again, I want my writing to be clear and understandable. And if I write a brochure, which I want to hand out to everybody, I don't want it at a graduate level, right? I need to keep it at an 8th grade reading level. And this tool will help me guide in the right direction to make that possible. Does that make sense? So, and I find it's a little cumbersome because there's a lot of red and yellow when I start out with usually, because the red, it tells you you're using too long words, too many syllables, your sentences are way too long and things like that. And then as you start working with the text, you actually make the sentences shorter. You try to replace longer words with shorter words. And all of a sudden, you can get it down to very complicated text to 10th grade reading level. And I'm happy with that for my blog. And so again, it's a tool I use every day because it helps me communicate to more people clearer. Does that make sense? And the really cool thing is, all those tools are free, and there's obviously professional versions out there, but you can use them for free to some extent. And the last tool I use on a daily basis is Zotero. How many of you are familiar with Zotero? So again, when you go into professional writing or into an academic career, Zotero, last time I opened it, I had in the neighborhood of 5,600 citations in there. So over the course of whenever I started reading or whenever I went back to school and started using this, as I added citations, this is how many articles I at least glanced at, if not looked at or read entirely. And so the really cool thing about that is I can go to that tool and I can find the citation, I can use those tools, then I can export the citation in many different formats. So again, it helps me, one, write about a topic I'm passionate about, also cite the research that I read, but cite it in a way that people will actually say, oh yes, this guy really knows what he's talking about because he adheres to specific formats. And that's important. You never ever want to lose credibility with your audience. You always want to look like a pro who knows what they're doing. Am I making sense? And then the other tools I use is, obviously, in other words, I have to read constantly to stay on top of whatever I want to stay on top of. And so some databases come in very handy, and I find myself using those three actually most frequently, which is in Dobby. It's an excellent open access database. So every article you find in there, you get the full article and it's available to you. So you don't have to pay to read the full article. PubMed I use quite frequently for my medical stuff. And Science Direct I use quite frequently as well to find good data to what I want to write about. Am I still making sense? So we have all those tools, okay? So you have your blog, you have your writing for a professional audience, you have writing for peer-reviewed journals, you have presenting at conferences, and you tie it all together by doing your homework and using tools that really help you look like a pro all the time. And I can tell you, I would have not made it through grad school without Zotero, Grammarly, or any of the databases. So really the bottom line then, who cares, why bother real writing for people? What's the bottom line, really? I think the theme is emerging because it leads to opportunities such as consulting gigs, collaborations, grant opportunities, while having fun spreading the word about your passion and expertise, right? And I'm going to show you what that looked like for me. And even though we talk about myself quite a bit, but I have colleagues and I read about, there's certain people I follow on the web and in academic circles who use the same platform, essentially. They became experts in their field, and because of their expertise, they are now getting gig after gig after gig to do whatever they want to do. And most of them are in a wonderful position where they actually can pick and choose what gig they want to take. Right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. No, we're not. No freebies, right? Yeah. So the bottom line then is so because I did what I did, I guess, part of what I did, so part of my education, part of writing the blog, part of doing my homework. So we are currently collaborating with Spectrum Health. Everybody familiar with Spectrum Health, right? So we are collaborating with Spectrum Health on a program which is called Culinary Medicine. So the Culinary Medicine program, actually what we are doing is we bring medical students, medical residents, and physicians into our kitchens to show them how to cook. And we not only show them how to cook, but also we present the evidence to them to showcase why they are cooking and how they are cooking it for the health aspects. And so the theory is if we show that audience how to cook, then they go back in their practices and actually tell their patients, you know what? Here's how you cook healthier. Not you should eat healthier, but actually here's how you can do it. Or by the way, here or here or here are cooking classes. So essentially the goal of that is that eventually physicians are comfortable saying, you know what, we all know you should eat healthier. I understand that it's really hard because not everybody knows how to cook. But here's some excellent cooking classes you can attend to learn about cooking for your specific disease or whatever you want to accomplish. And I can guarantee you, I can absolutely guarantee you, did I not have a PhD or did I not write about what I'm writing about, I would not be in this picture right there. I can guarantee you that, right? But it helped make the gig happen. Am I making sense? The other thing is money, right? So my writing, again, and my education helped me apply for grants. So I have a terrible track record with grants. I applied to a lot of grants, but only get a few of them, right? But that's okay. There's, for example, one grant we just finished last year. But again, it was a grant through Susan G. Komen we received, and we were able to bring yoga, music therapy, mindfulness interventions to breast cancer survivors on the lakeshore. And the really cool thing about that was it was free for the breast cancer survivors because the grant paid for all of our time, right? And again, I can guarantee you, if I didn't have established that expertise and track record of at least appearing like I know what I'm talking about, I would not have gotten that grant. Am I making sense? So I hope this illustrates how it becomes really obvious that when you write, even if you just start writing for yourself, somebody somewhere will pay attention and they will say, oh, this is pretty cool, right? And that someone will tell somebody else, and it's really fascinating how that works. And then, I don't know how many millennials we have here, but so as you think about your future, this is happening. Like, this is not going away. So essentially, people have full-time jobs, but aside their full-time jobs, what they have is they have side hustles or side gigs, right? It's perfectly acceptable for somebody to have a full-time job and then do other things on the side. I'm a perfect example of that. I do a couple of things aside from that. Obviously, it's all on the up and up because I ask for permission. But again, I want you to think about that. And so when you think about that, how do people find out about you? Right? Nobody can find out about you if you're not visible, if you have not established a track record of knowing, or of at least appearing as you may know what you're talking about. And again, if you do that, if you accomplish that, which you can do through writing and you start with a blog, all of a sudden people will contact you for, hey, I read your article about this, can we talk? And that it happens more frequently the more you write and be visible, which is really fascinating. And yes, it's cumbersome and nobody pays you for your writing, but the long game, it gets you work which you get paid for. And that's all I have. So, anyone have any questions? Thank you. I know a little. Thanks.
I already texted your blog to one friend.
Oh, nice. Thank you. So I hope I illustrated a little bit how you can use writing, how you can have fun with writing, but also as you write and as you write more about what interests you, you actually establish expertise. And that expertise in the long run will help you get jobs and paychecks. Thank you so much.